Have you been to Express lately? People can't get enough of their clothes. They're like instant confidence boosters. The jeans come in a temp control fabric that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather. And the t-shirts, hands down, they'll feel like they're made of the softest fabric you've ever worn. And get this, the suits have stretch and look sharp. Like, what? How do they do that? Everyone's raving about the newest looks from Express. Just check out the 5-star reviews. See for yourself and shop the latest at express.com and in stores.
This is the Action Network Podcast.
Crushed it. It's good.
All right, here we go.
From the 10, throwing end zone. Spectacular catch. They're saying it's a catch. Touchdown.
You see, most gamblers, when they go to gamble, they go to win.
Oh, my God. That's incredible.
Big bank, small bank, I like to make money. All right.
That is the ultimate kibosh.
You want to bet?
And we are underway.
And welcome to another edition of the Action Network Fantasy Flex Podcast. I am your host, Chris Raybon, here with Sean Kerner, and we have a very exciting guest for you guys today as we continue to talk about wide receivers. No one better to talk wide receivers than Matt Harmon, football writer and analyst at Yahoo Sports, and of course, the creator of Reception Perception. Matt, how's it going, man?
What's going on, guys? I'm glad we got all of the needless discussion about LA geography that literally everyone that does not live in LA hates. We're glad we got that out of the way before we started recording. I'm very excited to talk to you guys today. I love this, this year's just draft board of wide receivers is awesome in general. I mean, I feel very lucky that I've been studying this position for so long, and it feels like it's kind of coming ahead now with all of these just good players, the position. But really, the meat of fantasy drafts is the guys we're going to cover today, and I'm pretty excited to hear, what you guys think about these players as well.
Oh yeah, no, it's going to be exciting. I'm so glad you joined us. And Sean, how's it going out here with you? I'm back on the East Coast. You're in LA. What's good?
Yeah, I'm missing you over here, man. I'm just excited that, recording this a week away from the Hall of Fame game. So we're about to see some of these players in action. I can't wait to see the rookies in preseason. Just after a year where we didn't have preseason, I think I took it for granted. So I'm just stoked that we're going to get preseason back this year. Can't wait.
Yeah, man. You're a degenerate when you miss preseason DFS. It's I can't play the team's number 8 wide receiver. What's going on here? All right, guys, we're gonna get right into this. We're gonna talk about the theme is gonna kind of be wide receiver twos. So we're gonna talk about who we're targeting, in that ADP, and then guys that have that kind of upside in the net and kind of the wide receiver 3 ADP, and guys are avoiding as well. So let's start it off though, Matt. You do, as you mentioned, you study this position for a long time, and you came up with a kind of methodology to evaluate wide receivers called Reception Perception, which I personally love. Just talk a little bit about that and how it's kind of aided you in evaluating the position.
Yeah, so for those who are unfamiliar with Reception Perception, one of the real cool things is this year it's now officially its own website, receptionperception.com, independent outlet. Very excited about it. And it's been great to, I think, try to make this information more easier to navigate, try to give it in a way that folks can really, dive into individual players. They can dive into league-wide data. And basically the goal with Reception Perception, I mean, you guys know this and all your very smart listeners know this, that wide receiver is it's probably the position perhaps in the entire NFL that is the most dependent on outside variables in order to accrue production. And you can look at a player's stats and it doesn't even come close to telling you the whole story about the guy. Obviously, you just need a good quarterback, right, to put up numbers, but you also need that quarterback to have a good offensive line. The receiver needs to be put in a position to win via their skill set by the coaching staff. Need to be correctly evaluated by the team that they're on. But I think Reception Perception is the only thing out there, the only resource out there is going to properly isolate a wide receiver from their surroundings. And I do that by going in over an 8-game sample for NFL players and college players back again this year and I chart every single route that they run in that game, how often they get open versus man, zone, press, etc., how often they run and get open on each individual route type. So again, the goal of Reception Perception is to take all of these great wide receivers we know out there, and not only just try to categorize them and show, the readers and the viewers where they're good, what their skill set is, what position on the field, slot, flanker, X receiver they might fill, and then how that affects their production, but also isolate the wide receiver from those surrounding variables so that we can try to spot like who's good before everybody else knows that they're good. And that's kind of been the main purpose that people get excited about with reception perception. But obviously, as like a big old dork that I am, there's, like 35 things I get excited about. So that's kind of the long, Hollywood Tower of Terror elevator pitch there for reception perception.
No pitch necessary. It's really great. And I always want, I'm always interested in this because I think about this a lot. So I wonder your opinion on because you mentioned the different receiver types, and you have what is it, the X who on the line of scrimmage, and then the flanker is, and then the flanker is kind of off, right? Is it harder for X's to be consistent because of that? They're kind of tethered to that line of scrimmage. Do you think?
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed, and this was probably, this is the cool part about working with reception perception, is there are things that I thought about receivers or even would have said about receivers, 4 or 5 years ago that I don't think and would never say now. And I think the biggest thing was about probably 3 years ago. And I guess this should have been sort of inherently true, right? Maybe I should have realized it earlier, but exactly what you're saying is that where players line up really dictates not just how difficult their assignment is, but even can dictate, how they perform in reception perception or what matters more. Like there are guys that line up in the slot. I'm thinking of players like Cooper Kupp, Juju Smith-Schuster that have always been pretty big underperformers in terms of like man and press coverage and RP, but who cares, because percentage of route wise, they're mostly running up against zone coverage and they're getting those layup routes from the inside. So that's part of it too. And yeah, I think that the X receiver is the most difficult position to play. And we probably won't get into this player today because he's a little further down the draft boards, but I think like Michael Gallup is a perfect example of this, that in Dallas last year, they had CeeDee Lamb, who I think is unbelievable and is, I think actually could be more than just a slot receiver, but they had him lining up inside so often, seeing so many of those layup routes. I mean, almost in a similar way, like these two guys aren't even comparable, like skill set wise, but CeeDee Lamb was almost like playing a Cooper Kupp type of role last year. And it's just like, this is a freak big time athlete doing that assignment. That's pretty awesome, right? Like you're going to get a ton of layups there. And then you have Amari Cooper playing that flanker. He gets moved around pre-snap. They get him away from press coverage, which is something he struggled with early on in his career. And then you have Gallup like running against press coverage, tight man coverage on the outside, running some of those vertical routes. And you saw that sort of inconsistency in his production, even when the offense was popping off last year. I hope they move these guys around a little more in Dallas this year, because I think that could actually, maybe even increase CeeDee Lamb's ceiling if he's getting more of those vertical routes, and also level out Michael Gallup as well. So yeah, I think, Chris, that's like a fantastic sort of point about receivers, is where they line up can really dictate how inconsistent their production could be, or really just also categorize how difficult their assignment is. I always used to think of it when I started out with reception perception in like 2013-ish. It's like, what is even the point of comparing a Calvin Johnson to a Wes Welker or Julian Edelman type? Like they're basically playing two different positions.
Yeah. And, I think you learn it because that's what you're doing. You're watching these guys, and you when you're playing fantasy and you're like invested in a player and you're watching him line up every snap. Like there's certain times when you just know a guy's not going to have a good game, when you're like, okay, he's on the line of scrimmage. This guy is shutting him down. He's not going in motion. And I'm losing this week. So, I think it's a great point, and great points that you bring up about the differences. Let's jump right into our targets. And Sean, I'll go to you first, since I know Matt, I know you just kind of wax poetic about CeeDee Lamb, who has been shooting up everyone's draft board. But, Sean, we kind of touched on this last pod. Who are some guys in that, ADP 13 to 24 at wide receiver that you're targeting for this season?
Yeah, I think you knew this is coming, but the first guy is CeeDee Lamb for me at wide receiver 15. I feel like every year there's a guy in this wide receiver 15 to 20 range that I'm targeting heavily before they turn into the wide receiver ones I know they are. Matt kind of said it earlier. It's like we're trying to target these good wide receivers until people realize they're good. In this case, it's, they're elite receivers before people realize they're elite. 2019, it was Kenny Golladay and Chris Godwin in this range. Last year is Calvin Ridley. This year, it's CeeDee Lamb for me. I don't care if I sound like a broken record, bring him up on every pod. But he has top 5 upside as long as Dak stays healthy. And last year, he was limited to playing the slot, so his playing time was hovering around 70% all year. It's going to go up closer to 90%. As Matt was mentioning, he could line up on the outside more, be more of a deep threat. Like the sky's the limit for him, so I love getting him. So wide receiver 15 does feel closer to his floor. And then the other guy I'm targeting pretty heavily in this range is Robert Woods, wide receiver 19. He seems like a no-brainer there. Last year, his ceiling was held back a lot by Jared Goff. He had an ADOT of 7.1 yards. His yards per catch was 10.4. But, we've seen him be a more explosive player. Back in 2018, he had an ADOT of 11.3, a yards per catch of 14.2. So I wouldn't be surprised if, his ADOT goes way up with Stafford. We're going to see way more of these high value targets in terms of deep passing, red zone passing. So I think Robert Woods' ceiling is much, much higher. I view him as a low end wide receiver 1 now. So I love targeting wide receiver 19. And then, both their teammates, Amari Cooper and Cooper Kupp, either one, if I can't get CeeDee Lamb or Robert Woods, I'm more than happy to take any one of those to teammates later in this wide receiver 2 tier, because they both have similar upside. I think that the market is overlooking just how much potential there is in both the Cowboys passing attack and Rams passing attack this year.
Yeah, I love it. Matt, how about you? Who are you targeting in this range?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of love a lot of players in this range. This is sort of where you really want to start. I think if you're drafting, you want to shift from your focus on running backs, or maybe you've taken Travis Kelce early on, and you want to start to shift into focus on wide receivers and hammer like this tier, and honestly some of the next tier as well, because there's just so many quality players with path to playing time and legit skills and available targets and everything like that. So there's a lot of guys here, and I know we're going to discuss the Steelers later on is kind of a whole section, so I'll skip out on Deontay there. I love drafting Tyler Lockett in this range.
Yes.
I mean, he's like wide receiver 20, wide receiver 21 across ADP sources. Like, obviously, we know that the journey that it took for him to be a top 12 performer last year was a rocky one, right? I mean, people are so upset about the fact that it was such an inconsistent ride. But for a couple of reasons, I don't really care about that. Number one, like, if you had Tyler Lockett on those weeks where he crushed it, you won that week. I'm of the opinion that one player can win you a matchup, one player cannot lose you a matchup. And overall, I mean, unless we expect him to lose playing time or lose targets, and we have zero reason to expect that, we shouldn't really worry about the fact that the volatility was there, because his usage doesn't really pertain to that. I think really it's just Russ needs to play consistent over a full season, which I think we can reasonably project that as well. And I think Lockett's a stud. This guy's been over the 90th percentile in success rate versus man coverage each of the last 2 years. I don't think there's any problem with him as a player. I'm actually I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I feel pretty encouraged about like the idea of the Seahawks and Russ and kind of Pete Carroll with this old school running game philosophy sort of meeting halfway and potentially running a Rams style of offense with Shane Waldron coming over there. Like, that seems like the perfect, kind of meet in the middle of, we want to run the ball, we want to be a tough running team, but also an efficient passing team. You'd theoretically want that type of system on board. I think this whole Seahawks offense, like, I still love drafting Russ where he's going, DK, and especially Lockett in this range. I mean, I just think he's a lock to outkick this draft cost if he stays healthy for a full season.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Tyler Lockett. Like, that's the number one guy I look at in this range in terms of undervalued, because, wide receiver 15 3 years ago, wide receiver 14 2 years ago, wide receiver 8 last year. So he, as you mentioned, he's outkicked that ADP, pretty consistently. And it's funny because we're all talking about, like, do we need the Seahawks to throw more and them to really unlock Russ? And it's like, even with what they've been doing, even in the Schottenheimer seasons, before last year, Lockett was fine, because this guy, he's just a skilled guy. And And Sean, then I totally agree with you about the Rams receivers as well, because I think when you look at this team now, everything points to just a passing explosion. I mean, you have, your centerpiece of the offense, Cam Akers, going down. You have Sean McVay finally getting a quarterback that he kind of, handpicked and is comfortable with, throwing it out there. And then we know he's a genius. We know he can scheme Woods or Kupp open. That's every play. Every play is schemed to get Woods or Kupp open. They just use, the third receiver, whether it was it's Deshaun now, whether it was Cooks or Watkins in the past. They use him as like a decoy/deep threat. That's why we've seen those guys kind of underperform at times. But every play is designed to get Woods or Kupp open. We've seen both of them have humongous seasons. And I could see the Rams being one of the top passing teams. So love all those guys. Lockett, Kupp, Woods in this range. I think those are the guys to really target that you're getting some serious value. All right, let's move on to some guys that maybe we're avoiding a little bit. Matt, I know you said you're not really quote unquote avoiding anyone. This is kind of the tier you want to target in the 13 to 24 range. But is there anyone maybe that you're not quite as excited about, at their ADP, or you think it's more fair and not a guy you're necessarily jumping at to go after?
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody I'm actively avoiding, like you said, in this tier. If they kind of fall to the end of the tier, then I'm in at this point. With a guy like Amari Cooper fits into that range for me, because I do really think CeeDee Lamb's going to have that big explosive season that Sean outlined there. I think that Michael Gallup is a value. He's just, if I'm drafting a Cowboys receiver, he's just with cost obviously incorporated into it, he's probably the one that I'm going after the least. But I don't, especially since he's hurt right now, missing out on training camp is not ideal. I don't think it's a big problem for the long term, but he's kind of on that list for me. And then the other one, I would take Chris Godwin ahead of Mike Evans this year, if that counts as like an avoid in this tier. And also love taking Antonio Brown later in the draft as well. I mean, I realize that Antonio Brown has to have a discount because he's freaking Antonio Brown and might fly off the reservation at any point. But where he's going in drafts right now is extremely attractive based on just kind of his outlook. And I think he wasn't quite in reception perception like the Antonio Brown of old. By the way, the Antonio Brown of old was one of the 2 or 3 best to ever perform in RP. So he's not quite at that standard anymore, but still very well above average. And so I'd rather take those 2 Bucs guys. And I think Godwin goes in this tier. I think Evans goes in this tier, but I would rather target Godwin there over Evans, or just take Brown later on.
Yeah, the Bucs situation is highly fascinating. I mean, just because you have Tom Brady, who's when is he going to slow down? And then we have these 3 guys who can probably each, if they wanted to, command 150 targets and catch 100 balls. And it's they can't all do it. And you still have Gronk at tight end, and you just got, what did you just get? Gio Bernard,
Bernard for pass catch and roll.
This Sean is always saying that second year of Peyton Manning when he set all the records. It's that. I mean, we might really see that out of Brady, even at this age. So, but Sean, anyone you're kind of avoiding in this wide receiver 2 tier?
But I think Matt put it perfectly. I'm not avoiding these guys. I'm okay with any one of them that follow me, but I think a good example would be Kenny Golladay. He's listed at wide receiver 23 on here. That seems a bit high to me. He's fallen to me at wide receiver 30 in drafts, and I'm more than okay taking him there. But, going from Matthew Stafford to Daniel Jones is quite a drop-off. He's not going to have that touchdown upside we're used to seeing with him. I think he does help elevate Daniel Jones' game. And I think Daniel Jones is being underrated because of Kenny Golladay, but it doesn't work the other way around. So I'm willing to just wait and get either stud Bengals wide receiver over a guy like Golladay if he's going that early. But the one guy that I have noticed that I'm getting very little shares of in this range is Adam Thielen at wide receiver 18. He's coming off a career high 14 touchdowns last year. He had an 18.9 touchdown percentage. That is unsustainable. So I'm projecting him to come back down to earth with 11.5% touchdown percentage, which is closer to 9 touchdowns. And the Vikings defense was really shaky last year, so they were able to throw it more. I think the defense is going to improve. We're going to see more of these like run heavy game scripts we're used to seeing with Dalvin Cook. Mike Zimmer loves running the ball with the lead. So, I think Thielen's floor and ceiling are lower this year. And it's kind of incredible when you look at the top 20 receivers last year. Thielen had the third worst rate, where he finished outside of the top 60 27% of the time, which is remarkable thinking, he scored 14 touchdowns and he put up that many duds. So I'm really worried about taking a guy like Thielen here when there's so many better options that I think have a higher floor and ceiling combo.
Yeah, Thielen was the guy that kind of stands out to me. It's something we also talked about on the last show. I just think that touchdown rate that you hit on, Sean, is so unsustainable. I mean, and don't get me wrong, really great receiver. I think he does have skills to get open, in the end zone and things of that nature. But he had 19 red zone targets and 13 touchdowns on those 19 red zone targets. That's unheard of. I mean, your average receiver is going to get like 25%. Steven should have had 4 to 5 touchdowns in the red zone and finished the year with like 6. And instead he had 13. And that's a credit to him. It's a credit to Kirk Cousins. But, I just think you look at the numbers even, and, something with receivers, I think we should also, and it's kind of the theme is like career arc and, aging curves. And, nowadays it's usually that second year, sometimes even more so than the third year, where a wide receiver breaks out. But they also tend to kind of slow down as they get into their 30s. Thielen, 80 yards per game at age 27, 86 yards per game at age 28. And then down to 42 yards per game in an injury-plagued age 29 year, rebounds to only 62 last year. So, if the touchdowns go away, this is it's a different receiver. It's not necessarily the same receiver that's been putting up these big numbers, 3 of the last 4 years. So I think that he's a guy to avoid. And I'm kind of with you on Amari Cooper as well. It's not necessarily as much about him. It's just about the fact that I think CeeDee Lamb is going to see a bump. And I don't like taking guys that have injury issues like heading into the year. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm looking out, I'm monitoring that news, but those guys always worry me because it's like, especially this early in the draft, it's like I have choices. So and it's nothing against Coop, who obviously has top 10 upside, but I just think it's hard to go wrong. And so you have to nitpick. And because of that, I think Cooper lands on that list for me. Let's jump to the next tier. These are more so the wide receiver threes, in ADP, guys going in that 25 to 36 range across most sites. And Matt, I'll start with you again. Like, who are you targeting in that wide receiver 3 range, who you may even feel comfortable, starting them as your wide receiver 2, guys that you think have good value in this range?
Yeah, man, ton of good players here in this range that I like as well. I'm back in on the Odell Beckham experience this year for sure. But the guy here in this tier, right kind of at the top, is Brandon Ayuk to me. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about this, because this is when I just did my projections. Like, this is a tough offense to project because I think it's actually – like getting the 49ers right this year, I think might be the key to unlocking like fantasy football in 2021, because there are so many paths that this team could go down. Number one, the quarterback spot, right? Like, is it going to be Jimmy Garoppolo? Or is it going to be Trey Lance? I think it'll be Trey Lance eventually, but for how long? How long is that going to take? Because I think they're going to be two pretty different offenses. And I think Trey Lance, like, not only could he reduce the overall passing volume of the offense, but he could also boost the efficiency of the offense as a whole. Like, I just think they're going to be a much more dangerous attack that scores more touchdowns with Trey Lance in there as opposed to Jimmy Garoppolo. So I'm actually not necessarily too worried about that. Also, with the volume of these guys too, you have to ask yourself, well, if I'm going to be higher on Ayuk, am I going to be lower on Debo? Or am I going to be like lower on Kittle than the market? You have to ask yourself those questions. And then also the history of rookie quarterbacks, like elevating a bunch of different guys is not so great. But at the same time, they do have a very truncated target tree. It's mostly just those 3 guys. They don't really have like a pass catching running back. They don't have like, who's going to be their third receiver? Like Mohamed Sanu, Richie James. Like, it's not exactly an attractive group there. So I'm really in on Brandon Ayuk because I think he profiles as a true stud receiver to me. You know, he is up there at 75.7% success rate versus man coverage against in reception perception as a rookie. And like, I expected him to be sort of a create a touch player, you know, like sort of like what Deebo Samuel is, but he went out there in year one and was a stud route runner, above average success rate on every single route on the tree, wins vertical, wins short, wins intermediate, can beat press. Like, I don't think the 49ers have had a receiver like this. You know, I'm not even sure like Kyle Shanahan's offenses have had a receiver like this outside other than Julio Jones that 1 year in Atlanta or a couple years in Atlanta there. I just think Ayuk profiles as somebody that I don't want to bet against, like commanding a dominant target share within this offense. And again, I want to kind of be ahead of the curve on this offense in general because I think they're about to sort of take that next step this year, you know, rolling into the future years with Trey Lance there.
Yeah, I'm with you on Ayuk. I think if there's one lesson that we continuously see where you never want to kind of follow these like rules of thumb too far because there's always exceptions. And that's why we spend so much time breaking each player down. But like when in doubt, like a wide receiver entering year two, who is already pretty good in year one, like you're going to hit so much more than you're going to miss, you know, like there'll be a couple of times. And I think Sean brought out like his, I think it was like Denzel Mims, maybe the next like Dante Pettis. Like he might be that guy that you know, doesn't pan out. Right. But like in general, I mean, it's like, you're going to hit so much more than you're going to miss. And you could just look at the you know, look at any like class over the last, you know, 10, 15 years and just look at guys who had a pretty decent year. And even some guys who didn't have a good year one, you know, going to year two, like DJ Chark comes to mind, guys like that. So it's just that year where players make a huge jump. So given how good Ayuk was already, he's one of those guys that it may not matter who else is there. It's just the skill is there. And that's
you know, it's like there's a difference between like Dante Pettis level of flashing and like Denzel Mims level of flashing and like what Ayuk did last year, you know, and like I know people get hung up on the small sample of like, you know, like 4 or 5 games where all 3 of these guys played together or whatever. But it's like, listen, this is like the normal trajectory of a receiver is like he's as a rookie starts out a little slower. And then once they're cooking by the end of the year, they're earning a dominant target share and stuff like that. And that was what Ayuk was doing. I don't see any scenario where Kyle Shanahan's like, well, listen, we got to dial back Ayuk's touches or something. Like, give me a break. This guy, I think, is like the next stud receiver. I think he's right up there in my mind with guys like Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb as like the one to take that elite step this year, even if Justin Jefferson has already done it.
Yeah, and just to put some numbers on this, I mean, Ayuk averaged 5 catches for 62 yards a game last year. And I went back over the last 3 decades and I looked at the aging curves for every different age range of wide receiver. And, you know, guys going from age 22 to age 23, on average, their receptions, yards, and touchdowns increased by about 20% per game from in that age range. So, I mean, this, like, if you just look at that year one, you know, 5 catches, 62 yards, about 0.4 touchdowns per game. I mean, you could be looking at a top 10 receiver easily in year two if you kind of project that forward. So I like that call there.
This is Action Network podcast producer Matt Mitchell, here to tell you our friends at BetMGM have a great new sign-up offer for our listeners, a $600 risk-free first bet. Here's how it works. If you don't already have an account at BetMGM, just sign up, make your first deposit, and place that initial wager. If the bet wins, you get all the money. If it doesn't win, BetMGM will refund you in free bets up to $600. It's that simple. Just click on the link in this episode description to get started. BetMGM has been a great podcast partner, and they've got all the features gamblers like us love, like live betting and daily odds boosts. Plus, they're compatible with BetSync, so when you place a wager at BetMGM, that bet can automatically be tracked in your Action app. So open an account today and make your first bet risk-free up to $600. Just click on the link in this episode description to get started. Must be 21 or older and physically located in Michigan, New Jersey, Colorado, Indiana, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Tennessee, Nevada, or Pennsylvania. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado and Nevada, 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-270-7117 in Michigan, 1-800-889-9789 in Tennessee, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, or 1-888-532-3500 in Virginia. BetSync not available in Nevada. Thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
Sean, who are you looking at in this wide receiver 3 range as far as guys you're targeting?
So I already mentioned these guys earlier, but I like the idea of getting either Jamar Chase or T. Higgins as your wide receiver 3. I think both of them could easily provide wide receiver 2 value this year if Burrow stays healthy. T. Higgins usually falls a bit later, so he's typically the guy I target in this range. He flashed a ton of upside as a rookie. He wasn't even a full-time player until week 3, so we really had weeks 3 through 11 where he was a full-time player and Joe Burrow was quarterback, and he was wide receiver 19. And he was even able to put up wide receiver 28 numbers weeks 12 through 16 with Brandon Allen and Ryan Finley under center, which I always think is a good sign when you can put up quality numbers with horrific quarterback play. Like, that's a really good sign. So yes, Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd could eat into his target share. I'm not too worried about that because this should be a pass-happy team with plenty of negative game scripts. So wide receiver 28 feels closer to his floor. So I love being able to get a guy with so much upside where I think he's being drafted closer to his floor. And then I can't get away if I don't mention this guy every year. I typically have 2 hard and fast rules. Number 1, don't draft a kicker defense if you don't have to. And number 2, don't underestimate Robbie Anderson. I think he's still cheap, way too cheap at wide receiver 35. I was surprised last year when Joe Brady used him as his X receiver, the Michael Thomas role in this offense. He had a really diverse route tree than we're used to seeing. He's not just the deep threat in this offense. So I think he has a higher weekly floor ceiling combo, and he already has that chemistry with Sam Darnold. I don't think Sam Darnold's going to take this offense necessarily to like the top tier. But coming off a year where this offense only threw for 16 passing touchdowns, they are due for some positive touchdown regression. So I love getting Robbie at wide receiver 35 this year.
What's the logic like across the industry for having Anderson at like 35? Like, I don't.
Yeah, he's always underrated. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that like Terrace Marshall could dig in, and obviously McCaffrey could dig into the target share too. I really like Terrace Marshall as a prospect, and he's already kind of flashing in camp and all that stuff. But I just don't really see how Anderson is going to lose too much volume. I don't see really the team taking too much of a step away from the way they called plays last year and being, relatively a pass friendly environment. And, I mean, I don't know if Sam Darnold's better than Teddy Bridgewater, but Teddy Bridgewater was not very productive in terms of like where like the money areas, like red zone, 3rd down, 4th down, all that type of stuff. I don't really, I'm with you, Sean. I don't really understand where like what the deal with Robbie Anderson is and the fact that they gave him more layups last year. I actually would love to see them be a little more multiple with their receiver usage. Like, I think they were too pigeonholed to having Curtis Samuel in like the slot receiver role. I think they were too pigeonholed in having DJ Moore as their vertical receiver, when I think those guys could all have been a little more interchangeable. But I think there's still going to be plenty of layups for Robbie Anderson, and maybe some more deep passes would actually level out his weekly upside that we saw kind of evaporate from early of the year.
Yeah, and like if there was ever a pro Sam Darnold argument, it's the fact that Robbie Anderson is actually great with Sam Darnold. Like those two actually had a really good connection, and the numbers kind of back it up. When if you compare Darnold's numbers with Anderson and Anderson's numbers with Darnold to with everyone else, those two hit it off. So I think that Robbie Anderson is an absolute steal going at wide receiver 35. And yeah, for me, it's some of the guys you guys already mentioned. I love Brandon Ayuk. I love T. Higgins. And I know we're about to talk about the Steelers a little more in depth because I think it's a really interesting situation with 3 guys who kind of are almost interchangeable in how you project them to an extent. But I love Chase Claypool. I think you don't bet against talented wide receivers entering year 2 because, the volume is already kind of what it was to get them to a good place in year 1 for all these guys we're talking about. And a lot of times you see an increase in year 2, not just because of, their role is growing, but just because their skill set is growing. And Claypool is like, he's almost like the poor man CeeDee Lamb in a way, in the sense that like, he also didn't run a full complement of routes that the amount that he could have. Like, he was up and out in the 60-70%. For a lot of the year. So, and even into the postseason. So huge upside there, I think, for him. So I'm targeting a bunch of those year 2 guys, excuse me. Matt, who are we looking to fade, if anyone, in that wide receiver 3 range?
Yeah, there's three guys in this range that I find myself not really drafting very often. One, and it's mostly because of just like ambiguous situations. The first one is DJ Chark, wide receiver 33-ish, right around there. I mean, mostly because like, guys, what are the odds that like Marvin Jones just straight up outproduces DJ Chark? Like would you be like 5% surprised? You know, I mean, no. And I think, yeah. Up, yeah, right. Like, I mean, like 0% surprise if that happens. Basically,
can we get the roll call? Like, let's do it. Like, I'll give the odds maker the first crack at it. Like, give us your odds of like the three Jags receivers. Like, what are their percentages of finishing as the top Jag receivers?
I'm saying it's closer than people think, and I think that's what Matt's alluding to. I think that Chark probably has the best odds of being the highest scoring receiver, but we don't really know how it's going to shape up. So I put like Chark at 50. I'd put Chenault probably at 30 and Marvin Jones at 20. And people probably think that those are too close together.
I'd probably have it even closer. I'd probably put like Chenault at 35, Chark at 35, and Jones at 30. Because like Chenault entering year 2 with the prospect of getting like easy catches, and you know what I mean? Like it's so close.
That extra 10% is Colin Johnson. Is that what?
No. I said 35, 35, 30. That's 100, right? I just meant of those three.
5% chance it's Colin Johnson.
Oh yeah, it's like we don't know. That's what I think Matt is alluding to.
5% of 5 is Tim Tebow. I don't know. I mean, Travis Etienne.
Travis
like
Etienne,
that. Yeah.
The slot receiver.
Yep.
Well, I think the thing with these receivers too is like this is definitely, you mentioned it, Sean, up the top. Like preseason's coming up. I have no idea how Urban Meyer's going to handle this thing, but I would love to see like deployment of these three receivers in preseason, because I know like a lot of people freaked out about Laviska Shenault when they talked about Travis Etienne in this like gadget slasher role, but I was like, good, we don't want like Laviska Shenault getting carries and little 6-yard ADOT passes. Like we want him playing almost like the 2018 version of like what Juju did, is like a big slot receiver, like that gets some vertical targets as well. I think Shenault could crush it in that role. Like if we see him lining up as that big slot, like sign me up for him to be that guy, because I think he can, he's awesome after the catch. People are going to look at his like overall reception perception rates, like I said, against man and press and worry a little bit. But again, what I'm focused on for interior receivers is, can they beat zone? Can they win in contested situations? And can they win after the catch? Check for Shenault. And I think he's a guy that could be really good in that role, but he's definitely like the coaches need to use him right way. And then Marvin Jones just outkicks his ADP every single year, despite the fact who he's playing across. So I'm in on drafting him. I think the gap has got to be closer between him and Chark. And, just one more thing on Urban Meyer. Like I'm not an Urban Meyer guy. Nobody's an Urban Meyer guy. Like nobody thinks like, oh, this guy's like a great dude or whatever. Maybe he shouldn't have said the thing about DJ Chark, big guy that played small last year. Maybe you like took offense to him saying it in public, but not wrong. He was not wrong about that assessment. Like Chark did not play well in 2020 on an individual reception perception basis. So maybe he bounces back to the 2019 version of the player, but I think there's enough ambiguity there to just bypass Chark and take those other two Jags receivers, especially Jones, because the gap between their ADP just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. When they went out, Darrell Bevell, former Lions offensive coordinator, went out and made sure they got Marvin Jones there. So I'm fading Chark, and just the two Denver receivers to me, I haven't really taken a lot of them. Like them both as players, but I don't know about you guys. I have a lot of questions about the fact that like across consensus rankings and in ADP right now, the Broncos have two top 40 receivers, two even like top 35 receivers in some places, a top 10 tight end in Noah Fant, a rookie running back that everybody's gassed up about, but they're going to have a top 5 defense most likely this year, and they're captained by Teddy Bridgewater and or Drew Lock. Like, I don't know, somebody's not going to hit here. I think it could probably be Fant more likely than the receivers, but because of just like, I'm not sure which receiver pops this year between Judy and Cortland Sutton, I haven't really been proactively drafting either.
The answer is Tim Patrick.
Yeah, right. And they still have like good ancillary players too. It's not like a San Francisco situation where it's like Ayuk, Kittle, Samuel, and that's it. Tim Patrick is a good player. They have KJ Hamler as like a speed slot receiver. Yeah. So the fact they have all these other ancillary targets that are good. They have 2 running backs. I still think Melvin Gordon's going to mix in some way. And they're probably going to be a run first team because, this, and also like it's Pat Shurmur pulling the trigger here, not Kyle Shanahan at the controls of this offense. So there's just a lot of ambiguity in this Denver situation. And I know that like Teddy Bridgewater supported plenty of good fantasy receivers last year, but that was playing with Carolina's defense in much more like pass friendly situations. And I think Denver's going to be pretty conservative as an offense this year.
Yeah, that's so true. Like it's hard to get a handle on Sutton because, he was so good the year before, and then he goes down and now he's coming back to it's not like a totally different situation, but it's like that combined with the injury. It's just, there's just a lot of question marks. And I agree. There's still enough other guys. I mean, you have Robbie Anderson going after, Sutton in most drafts. So there's just guys that you can take that I think you feel better about in that range. Sean, anyone you're avoiding here?
I mean, Devontae Smith at wide receiver 30 seems a bit rich for me. I think, I can't blame anybody for taking him at ADP. You're certainly betting on talent. I think he'll be a quality wide receiver. I'm not worried about his weight, being too light or anything like that. I was a bit disappointed on his landing spot. I thought he'd be a good fit for the Lions. He'd be the alpha receiver out of the gate. And the reason why we're drafting Jalen Hurts is his rushing ability, not because he's an accurate passer. So I think, his accuracy issues, if they continue, will hurt a guy like Smith. So I'm just taking Jamar Chase just a couple picks earlier. If you want to invest in like a talented rookie in a good situation, I think Jamar Chase is the way to go. And then the other guy is Deebo Samuel at wide receiver 34. Matt alluded to it. They're a tricky team to project because at some point Trey Lance should take over. This is going to be a pretty run-heavy team. And I think Brandon Ayuk is the guy that you want to take a gamble on. I think he could be a better fit with Trey Lance. But when Trey Lance is under center, he's a scrambling quarterback. So a low ADOT player like Deebo Samuel could be cannibalized a bit by, his scrambling. So in this range, I think you should be targeting high ceiling players anyway. So this is when you take your flyer on like a Will Fuller type of guy, whereas Deebo Samuel, he's like more of a high floor guy that we can't even say he has a high floor because we just don't know if he's going to have that volume this year. So he's a guy I've been fading in this range just based on my draft strategy. Even though I do think he's a good receiver, he just doesn't fit into my draft plans.
Yeah, I think Samuel's another guy that's tough. I wouldn't say I avoid him because I think as Matt kind of alluded to, that San Francisco offense, the targets are kind of locked in to an extent. And one thing is that they do scheme their guys. Like Deebo Samuel gets schemed plays and catches and runs. And so I think especially in a full PPR, I don't think he's a guy to avoid. I do think he's a guy that could end up with like a disappointing touchdown total, or a disappointing, like a lot of catches, but not as many yards as you'd want kind of guy. But I don't think he's a guy that will necessarily bust or anything like that. I'm kind of in terms of the guys that I could see busting the most in this range, I think it is DJ Chark, number one, who I really don't think Urban Meyer likes this guy. And the fact that he had a really poor rookie year before kind of exploding almost by necessity in year two, not to take anything away from him, but we've seen kind of bad DJ Chark in 2 of his 3 seasons, in a sense. And, and then for Meyer to kind of go, they everything changes. This is not the guy who drafted him. This is not the regime that drafted him. You have, as Matt talked about, them going and getting a new offensive coordinator and getting a new, outside wide receiver and kind of talking about shifting things around and adding more guys to the receiver mix. So the writing's on the wall for Chark. And then Sutton is it's just because of the ambiguity and the fact that their biggest holes of the team, they're great on defense, and then their biggest holes on offense are like quarterback and center. That doesn't bode well necessarily for like the passing game, right? Yeah, and that's not to say Cushenberry could be a lot better in year 2, but he, grading wise, he was just one of the worst players in the league at center in year 1, and then Locke and Bridgewater haven't exactly impressed in their careers either. So just a situation I'm not really digging in fantasy. But I do a situation. I think I want to talk about this as kind of its own topic, because I think it's fascinating and it's important. And Matt, you kind of mentioned like getting San Francisco right is one of the keys. And I think another one is going to be getting the Pittsburgh Steelers receivers right, because I mean, you talk about a team with multiple receivers in that kind of top 30, top 40. And at the same time, you have an aging quarterback who didn't look quite right last year, but an offense who passed a ton, considering that it's just a bunch of short stuff. And it was just a weird looking offense. They're going to change some things. But so just like, what do you make of the Steelers wide receiver trio with Deontay and Chase Claypool and Juju? And how are you ranking them?
Yeah, I love talking about the Steelers because they're one of those situations where, like you said, 3 top 35, top 30 in certain outlets receivers. They've got a running back that everybody wants to draft in like the top 13 running back picks, but they have a quarterback that absolutely no one wants to touch. That doesn't make any sense. Either Roethlisberger is going to outkick expectations, give it one last good run, or almost all of these players are going to bust because Roethlisberger is just totally toast. It's one of those really like once you go out and project it, like run through the projections, I think you learn a lot about the team and you really kind of learn where you stand on it. And I hope that they change things offensively, because that was one of the worst teams to watch offensively last year, especially like if you were invested in Deontay Johnson or Chase Claypool or whatever. You knew this was just going to be like a slog. Like, don't even watch those primetime games like when they played the Bengals on Monday night. Just check your scores at the end of it, see how it went, but do not watch a second of this team. They were that tough to watch, especially when they were going against like Brandon Allen or Ryan Finley, whoever the hell it was last year. So yeah, I think that the way I look at this receiver core, I'm a big Deontay Johnson fan. I know that he had like a terrible yards per target, had a bunch of drops. I don't really tend to buy into drops as being a big problem because it's not a sticky stat year over year. I think if you can do enough good, coaches will live with the drops. And, Johnson got benched for like a quarter and a half last year because of the drops, but immediately then as soon as he gets back in there for the next couple of games, Ben goes right back to him. I think targets are earned, which is why he kept continuing to get looks, is because Ben thinks he's a good player. The offensive coordinator and the head coach clearly think he's a good player, and reception perception thinks he's a good player. Man, this guy gets open like nobody's business. 95th percentile success rate versus man coverage last year, top 10, number 1 against zone coverage last year, really strong 76% rate against press. Like, he gets open at a level like, the old Antonio Brown or like a Keenan Allen type of player. And it's not just on slants and stuff like that. I know that's where he got a lot of targets last year. I think they were using him in that way to try to like manufacture a running game when they didn't have one. The Patriots have done that in years past when they didn't have a great running game. They almost used like Julian Edelman as an outlet there. But I think Deontay, when you look at, you go on receptionperception.com, you search Deontay Johnson, he lights up that route tree, deep, outside breaking routes. I think he can be more than the player he was last year. So I'm betting on him not losing like a ton of volume. I'm betting on a boost in efficiency if they don't just run the same miserable passing game last year. And I'm with you, Chris, that I think you don't bet against Chase Claypool either, who also comes with a really good reception perception profile and actually has like a similar route tree to DK Metcalf as a rookie. Both of those guys were 50% slants and nines in reception perception as rookies. Like, I think he can expand his game, maybe not be as good as DK is, but can be sort of in that same territory. And Juju to me is just kind of the odd man out. Like, I think we've seen I think that Deontay has a bit more of an unknown ceiling. I think that Juju needs the right offensive environment to get the type of targets and produce the type of efficiency that he had in years past. I'm just not really betting on him out of these three guys. I'm not like proactively avoiding him either, but I guess based on the way I feel about the receivers, I think these guys can drag Ben Roethlisberger to one last decent year, especially if they incorporate more play action, if they incorporate more motion and more modern progressive ideas like that. Ben might resist it, but I do think the change to Matt Canada as the offensive coordinator was a good signal. So I just think Deontay Johnson is too good to fail. And I think Chase Claypool's on that upward trajectory as well. I wouldn't be surprised if by, the end of 2022, if they get their quarterback situation right, eventually we're talking about this as one of the better receiver duos in the NFL.
Yeah. I mean, and it's already, I would say, one of the better trios. It's just, there's some weird things going on in Pittsburgh. Like it just kind of a weird confluence of factors with, that weird offense, with Ben aging, with the defense being so good, with them not being able to run. It was just all this confluence of factors that kind of made, for lack of a better word, it was just weird. It was weird last year, but it was profitable in fantasy. I mean, guys were getting catches, guys were producing. So it's an important situation to get right. Sean, like, what are your thoughts on the Steelers receiving core? Anyone you kind of stands out as over or undervalued, or you think their ADPs are all pretty on point?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in line with ADP on all three of these guys. I think that Matt summed up pretty well. And, Deontay Johnson, I do think, has the best floor ceiling combo of the three. He led the NFL drops last year with 15. I don't think that's a sticky stat either. It just shows that he's getting open and getting targets. That's really all we care about. So I think he'll correct those mistakes heading into this year. I love his upside. Whereas, Chase Claypool has the highest ceiling by far out of the three. I mean, he has legit wide receiver one potential if things go right. And the only concerns I have with him have nothing to do with him. Last year, he had the lower floor because he was splitting some time with James Washington at the end of the year. But Mike Tomlin even admitted he was doing that to prevent him hitting his rookie wall. So I don't think playing time is going to be an issue this year. But when it comes to like Big Ben getting older and their offensive line being shaky, I do worry that we're going to see Big Ben getting rid of it quickly. Last year, he got rid of it the fastest rate last season, 2.3 seconds per drop back. I think he's going to continue to have to get rid of it quickly with a shaky O-line. So I think that could hurt, Chase Claypool's upside in the vertical passing game. But, pound for pound, Claypool has one of the highest ceilings in this range. So I have no problem targeting there. And Juju, we know what we're going to get with him. He has the highest floor for his ADP out of the three. Like, he's probably not going to win your league. He's probably not going to lose your league either. You pretty much know what you're going to get with him. And that's just not exciting a draft. So I've been, targeting guys like Deontay or Chase Claypool in spots because of that.
Yeah, I think Claypool is my favorite of the three to pick. I think he's the guy that, he was on par. I mean, 923 yards for Deontay, 831 for Juju, 873 for Claypool. So he was right on par with, guys 2 years older than him, guys that have been in the league longer, been with their veteran quarterback longer. And he put up those numbers in year one, 9 touchdowns compared to Juju's 9 and Deontay's 7. So, I mean, this guy Claypool, even in a situation where it was crowded and he had to really earn his targets, as Matt, you kind of, targets are earned. He earned them, and that was year one. So I think he's the guy that I'm targeting. And then I do agree. I think I'm going to go a little contrarian. I think compared to you, Matt, on Deontay versus Juju, because I think just based on ADP, I don't see a huge difference between them overall. I think I do agree that with your evaluation on Johnson, I think he's a great player. I think he can get open. And I think Juju can as well. And I just think when you look at their ADPs, Johnson's going at 22, Juju's going at 31. Yeah. I just think that because I'm not I think they're going to be projection wise, they project out pretty similarly. I mean, even last year, Juju 6.5 yards per target, Deontay 6.4. He had more drops, so you figure that those are. It's kind of their targets are worth, I think, very similar fantasy numbers at the end of the day. And when I think the last year was the better year, is going to go down as the better year of the two to have been jumping on Deontay. That was his year 2 season. He goes 144 targets, but my thing is comparing with Juju, who has had a bit of a downtick. But they're both age 24, and Juju's are when Juju got 150 plus targets, he had 1,400 yards. When Deontay gets 140 targets, he had 923 yards. You know what I mean? So I just don't know if there's truly room to grow. And I think Juju may be used a little more downfield as well than he was last year. Because I mean, that 8.6 yard per catch average, like no one wants to see that again. And so I think Deontay, I guess I would say like not because of his skills, but just the natural, like I think loser based on like his ADP in my opinion. When I'm kind of looking, so I think I will have the least of him just based on that ADP because I think Juju can replicate that production, 8-9 spots in receivers lower. So,
yeah.
Okay, so that is the Steelers wide receivers. I think that is definitely an important situation to kind of tackle. Let's finish up by talking about some guys outside the top 36, that we're targeting that we think you could be starting, week in, week out by the time, mid-season or end season rolls around. Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I've already mentioned a few, and there's once again a lot of receivers in this range that I'm excited about too. I mentioned like Michael Gallup and Antonio Brown early on as guys that I'm interested in targeting. Laviska Shenault and Marvin Jones we talked about as well. A couple others. I mean, no one's going to be surprised that I feel this way if they followed me the last few years. But like if Curtis Samuel gets himself off the pup, I'm like fired that ship up. I love the Washington offense as a whole this year. But one more guy too. I really want to know what you guys think about this player. Michael Pittman is a guy that outside the top 40 receivers really stands out to me as someone that could become like a weekly wide receiver too. There's not a lot of competition for targets there. We know that. They bring back T.Y. Hilton. I think T.Y. is like a role player. I think that when you look at a guy like Paris Campbell, just not the same type of player as Michael Pittman is. And, he's an interesting one in reception perception because he's at that like 71% success rate versus man that gives you like a pretty good confidence rating for his future. It's not quite at the level of players like Brandon Ayuk or Deontay Johnson, who I mentioned earlier, is like, going into their second seasons, you want to be betting on those players. Same with a guy like CeeDee Lamb, but I think when you look at Michael Pittman, I think he had a better rookie year, when you watch him than what he produced stat wise. And I think a lot of that is because he's an antithetical fit with the player that Phillip Rivers was last year. Like, I'm not really going out on a limb to say, I think Rivers could not push the ball downfield last year because he retired. Like, I think that's a pretty good estimation there. But Pittman still ran a ton of slants, a ton of dig routes in reception perception. Over 43% of his routes were there. But I think he should be used as more of like a vertical receiver, a true X downfield guy. Carson Wentz, I don't know if he's the player to take advantage of that. There's still a lot of questions there with Carson Wentz. Like, he just might stink. But at the same time, he is, I think Pittman profiles as a true number one receiver at some point. I think he could grow into that. And the team is really counting on him too. There are different players like Jalen Reagor, that people compare Michael Pittman to, but I think Reagor like really blew it with his opportunity. And then his team went out and drafted a receiver in round one. The Colts have really done nothing at receiver. So I think they're really counting on Pittman to be that guy this year. And I'm of the opinion that he could hit in that role.
I love Michael Pittman. I mean, I think he is first and foremost, he's a great football player. I mean, if you go back and watch his college tape, I've never been so impressed by a guy that I was studying because of like him being a receiver. I was never so impressed with a guy who's playing on like special teams. I mean, it doesn't matter because he's not going to play special teams for the Colts, but it's just like he fell on like 5 fumbles. He blocked like 3, like he was just always where he needed to be and in affecting plays. And I think that bodes well. He's just his football's in the family with him. And I think
bloodlines.
Right. Yeah. And all things considered, I mean, still a pretty decent rookie year, over 3 catches a game, 65.6 catch rate. He wasn't bad by any means. And I think he's only going to get better, 8.2 yards per target. I think he's going to get better in year 2. I think that 12.6 yards per catch has room to grow. I think that 1 touchdown on 61 targets has a lot of room to grow, especially considering he's a 6'4", 223-pound receiver. So, I think he's and he's entering year 2. So I like Pittman a lot. But is there anyone else, Matt, on your list before I go to Sean?
No, those are kind of the big ones. Also, Mike Williams too is another one that I mean, he's just too cheap for the amount of targets he's likely to walk into. My business partner at Reception Perception, James Coe, often says like, if we could just get that, like how everybody needed to teach RG3 to slide. Like we just needed somebody to teach RG3 to slide. All we need for Mike Williams to have a big season this year is somebody to just teach him how to not land on his damn back like so hard every single time he goes up for one of those big catches. But I really like Williams. I think he's just kind of an underrated player too, because he was drafted so high. People kind of give him a lot of flack for what he's done so far. But if he can stay healthy in this offense attached to Justin Herbert, I think he's good enough to really return on that draft cost.
Absolutely. I think that's a guy Sean and I have been like pointing out for most of the season, this off season is like, yeah, Mike Williams is just going too late. Sean, who are the guys that you're kind of targeting that could potentially be starters outside the top 36?
Yeah, well, Mike Williams is the top guy I was going to mention. I mean, we've seen 1,000-yard season and a 10-touchdown season. He could actually put both together this year. And there's almost no downside taking him at wide receiver 49. I mean, I think he could be a legit wide receiver 3 to start the season, but this is a guy that you're drafting to start on your bench. No downside there. The other guy that I like outside of the top 36, he's pretty close though, is Brandon Cooks at wide receiver 39. He seems like a slam dunk at ADP. He's one of the cheapest number 1 receivers on his team that you can get outside of like the Lions, but we don't really know who their number 1 wide receiver is to begin with. This is absolutely their number 1 receiver. Tyrod Taylor, I don't think he's great necessarily, but he has shown the ability to push the ball downfield and be aggressive. He has the 5th highest ADOT over the past 6 seasons. So, he surprised people by, throwing it deep. I think he could help Cooks at least sustain value at his ADP. There's still a non-zero chance that we see Deshaun Watson start games for the Texans. I have no idea what the hell is going on there, but that's sort of like free upside taking Cooks at ADP 39. So I'm all about, targeting Cooks heavily at this ADP.
Yeah, Brandon Cooks is like I get it, the quarterback situation's in flux, but like you're still talking about a number like 1 receiver who has shown he can produce on high volume pretty much his entire career on a team that's going to be really bad. So
negative game script for basically every game, right? Like,
right.
So it adds up. It adds up to
they just traded Randall Cobb too. Open up that target distribution.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of absurd how late he's going.
Anthony Miller, right?
I
don't talk about Anthony Miller.
Does he still exist? He's like the most it's like he had that good rookie year and he's been like just. You forget he's on the field half the time.
Tell me about it, Chris. In like reception perception history, like if you historical subscribers to the site, like our highest tier, you can go through and like sort by success rate, first man coverage. Everybody's basically good. Everybody's been good that does that, except one player, Anthony Miller.
Yeah, Brandon Cooks. There's more love for Brandon Cooks there. That's a guy that I'm looking at. I think some of the other guys that I think Jarvis Landry at wide receiver 40, I think that's kind of a decent spot for him because you look at, like Odell Beckham and Landry were kind of equal even that year that Beckham stayed healthy. And I don't think Cleveland, I know they have a good defense, but I think they'll pass a little more just because they won't be, without all their receivers this year, assuming that they don't go through that same kind of injury issues. And, Landry, Beckham and Landry are locked into targets. Like it's the other guys, you start to worry because you have Hunt and Chubb battling it out in the backfield for targets. And then you have the 3 tight ends battling it out. But like Beckham and Landry could each be locked into like 25% plus. And so I still think that's like wide receiver 40 is too low for Jarvis Landry, a very skilled wide receiver. In terms of just, like, I know, people have different opinions on him, but the bottom line is he's been productive pretty much every year of his career. And that's all we want for fantasy. It doesn't matter how he's getting that production. So I like him. I think when you look at some other guys entering year 2, like I think Laviska Shenault is another guy that I like targeting because I just think, again, I'm low on DJ Chark and Marvin Jones. Well, I think he will outkick his ADP. I like him too. He's also a little bit older. So there's like there's like a decent chance that like Chark and Marvin Jones maybe don't quite cut it for what Jackson was trying to do. And Shenault, I mean, this guy's explosive. You can manufacture him targets. You can line him up in different spots. He's entering year 2. So there could be a monster explosion from him that we might not even see coming. because, we're kind of there's just a lot of uncertainty with the Jaguars. So I like him, and Darnell Mooney, another guy entering year 2 who came on down the stretch last year, I think at wide receiver 56. He's worth a shot because I don't know if the Bears defense will be that great or as great as in years past. And again, it's another team where, there's some things going on at tight end and at running back, but they need a number 2 wide out. And I think Mooney can get you like 4.5 catches per game, just based on volume, like just based on availability of targets. So he's another guy that I'm targeting in outside the top 36. Matt, we really appreciate you joining the show. Tell everybody where they can find you and what you're up to.
Yeah, of course. I really appreciate you guys having me. This was awesome. I appreciate just going back and forth with smart people about these receivers, because I can get locked in on how good I think these guys are, but it's also good to evaluate roles and everything like that. But yeah, if people want to keep up with me, of course, doing everything with Yahoo Sports this year, we've got the podcast, we've got the Fantasy Football Live on Sunday mornings, of course, all just the great stuff we got going on there. But if you like the info on Reception Perception, it's its own outlet this year. Very easy to find, receptionperception.com. We've got 3 tiers of subscriptions based on what type of access you want, so that there's something for everybody. We got a Discord channel, a private YouTube show for our subscribers. Everything is going on there. So I hope people will check it out.
Yeah, they're really great stuff. Thanks again for joining us, Matt Harmon. And you can find Sean Kerner on Twitter at @the_oddsmaker. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Raybon. You can also find us at those same handles on the Action Network app. And be sure to check out our fantasy football draft kit on actionnetwork.com. Until next time, let's get this money.
Switching to Geico is a good idea, especially when you consider everything.
First off, Geico makes it easy to switch. They have licensed agents available 24/7 online or over the phone.
But if it's so easy, you might start thinking everything is easy, even big wave surfing. And it's not. It's actually quite difficult.
Well, if you switch to Geico, you could save hundreds on car insurance. And you could keep saving by bundling your motorcycle, boat, and RV, plus your home or renter's insurance.
But saving money might lead you to make some questionable purchases, like a 20-foot feather boa. And do you know how hard it is to clean a 20-foot feather boa?
Well, they do have an industry-leading mobile app you can use to pay your bill, file and manage a claim, or add a new driver.
But when life gets a little easier, it makes you too confident, and you start calling everyone Ace. And you're better than that.
Well, Geico has a 97% customer satisfaction rating and has been saving people money for 85 years. It's hard to beat that.
But you're right.
Switch to Geico. It's obviously a good idea.